Have you ever wondered what soldiers carried in their pockets during World War II? Besides ammunition and rations? These were not just objects, but entire universes contained in tiny items that gave them the strength to live and hope to return home. In the harsh conditions of the front, where life was measured in minutes, these little treasures became the main armor for the soul. Each item held a story: a worn-out photograph of a loved one, a father's cigarette case that saved him from shrapnel, or simply a smooth stone from the bank of a native river. These things were an invisible thread connecting the soldier to a world where there were no explosions or losses. They served as reminders of what was worth fighting for and where it was essential to return. Watch the video to the end to find out how a tiny teddy bear saved the life of a Soviet pilot and why British soldiers considered an ordinary button to be the best talisman. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of soldiers' souls. In the breast pocket of their undershirts, closest to their hearts, almost every soldier kept his most precious relic: a photograph. A small rectangle of cardboard, yellowed by time and moisture, was more valuable than any award. These photographs captured those who were waiting for them at home: smiling wives, serious mothers in dark headscarves, children whom they had left behind when they were just babies. Looking at these faces, the soldier remembered that he was not just a combat unit, but someone's son, husband, and father. This thought gave him strength in the most desperate moments. The photographs were cherished like the apple of one's eye, wrapped in several layers of oiled paper or hidden in homemade fabric envelopes. They were taken out during rare moments of calm, gazing at familiar features and mentally talking to those who were so far away. It was a silent dialogue that helped them stay sane. Sometimes a photograph really did save a life, but not in a mystical way. A thick stack of photos in a pocket could stop or slow down a piece of shrapnel, leaving a dent in the image of a loved one as a memento. Such a case was considered a real miracle and a sign from above. These photographs were a kind of psychological shield. They reminded them of peaceful life, home, love, everything that the war was trying to take away and devalue. They were a promise that the soldier made to himself to survive and return. Soldiers often shared stories about their families, showing each other these cherished photographs. At that moment, the harsh, weather-beaten faces of the fighters softened and warmth appeared in their eyes. This brought them closer together than the attacks they had endured together. After a battle, when they lost a comrade, the soldier's first task was to search his pockets for a photograph. They considered it their duty to preserve it and, if possible, return it to his family. It was the last tribute to a fallen friend. The photos were not just a memory of the past, they were a ticket to the future. Looking at them, the soldier made plans for what he would do first when he returned home. These dreams, born from a small photograph, were a powerful incentive to live. Many carried these cards throughout the war, and today they are kept in family archives as the most valuable relics. Worn with bent corners, they tell a story of love and loyalty that proves stronger than the most terrible war. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What item from your home do you think could be your main source of support in a difficult situation? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what soldiers on the front lines believed in? In a world where logic gave way to constant danger, soldiers of all armies sought protection, not only in armor and shelters, but also in faith. Almost everyone had their own personal, secret talisman to which they entrusted their lives. These could be a wide variety of items, often of no material value. A piece of native soil sewn into a locket, a splinter from the threshold of one's home, or a smooth river pebble. The main thing was not the object itself, but the belief in its protective power. Religious symbols were the most common amulets. Crosses worn around the neck, small icons, pages from sacred books. These items gave hope for divine intercession. They were worn secretly under clothing, like the most intimate secret. Often, an object associated with some miraculous rescue became a talisman. For example, a bullet that pierced a helmet but did not hit the head, or a shrapnel fragment stuck in a soldier's cap. Such lucky items were carried around, believing that they would ward off trouble a second time. Soviet soldiers often kept their komsomol or party membership cards as talismans. For them, it was not just a document, but a symbol of belonging to a great country and a just cause. Belief in an idea also became a powerful defense. American and British soldiers popularly carried lucky coins or playing cards, such as the Ace of Spades. It was believed that carrying such a card in one's pocket would bring good fortune in battle. It was superstition, but it helped to cope with fear. Sometimes the amulets were quite unusual. A dried four-leaf clover, a rabbit's foot, a small child's drawing. These items connected the soldier to a world where luck, goodness, and simple joys existed. Soldiers never bragged about their talismans and rarely showed them to anyone. It was a deeply personal, almost intimate relationship. It was believed that if you told someone about your amulet, it could lose its power. Belief in a talisman did not make a soldier reckless, but it gave him confidence. At the decisive moment of an attack, this confidence could play a key role. It helped him take that very step forward when his instinct for self-preservation was screaming, "Back." What if I told you that even a simple lighter could be not just a source of fire, but a true engineering masterpiece created from trash? Read on to the next chapter to find out how a cartridge case gave birth to a flame of hope. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries. Just kidding, but the ingenuity of soldiers really knew no bounds. Soldiers turned the long hours of lull between battles, filled with anxiety and anticipation, into a creative process. This is how trench art was born. Unique crafts made from materials that the war provided in abundance. The main material for creativity was military debris, spent cartridges, shell fragments, pieces of aluminum from downed aircraft. In the hands of craftsmen, these deadly objects were transformed into amazing things. Brass cartridges were used to make lighters, mouthpieces, cigarette cases, and even vases for wildflowers. The process required patience and a minimal set of tools. Usually a knife, a bayonet, and a whetstone were enough. Inscriptions were scratched onto the smooth surface of the metal. In memory of the war, the name of a loved one, the name of a city, or the date of a memorable battle. Each such item became unique. The manufacture of rings and bracelets from plexiglass, the material used to make aircraft cockpit windows, was considered a special art. Transparent or colored plastic was heated over a fire, shaped as desired, and then polished to a shine with a cloth from a greatcoat. Such decorations were often sent home as gifts. Wood carving was also a popular activity. Figures, smoking pipes, and spoons with patterned handles were carved from pieces of wood. This activity not only helped to pass the time, but also had a calming effect, distracting from difficult thoughts. These items were not just trinkets. In conditions where all personal property was reduced to a minimum, such a homemade item acquired enormous value. It was proof that even in the hell of war, a person remains a person capable of creating, not just destroying. Trench art was a kind of act of defiance against war. Soldiers took objects created for destruction and gave them a new, peaceful life. It was a small personal victory over chaos and death. Many of these crafts were true works of art, reflecting not only the skill of the author, but also his feelings, hopes, and memories. They were a kind of diary, written not with words, but carved into metal and wood. These items also had practical value. A homemade lighter was much more reliable than damp matches. In a cigarette case protected tobacco from moisture. In this way, creativity became part of a survival strategy. Today, these modest soldier artifacts can be seen in museums. They touch the soul with their naivety and sincerity. They tell us more about the war than official reports and chronicles, because the soul of an ordinary soldier lives in each of them. What if I showed you a time machine capable of transporting a soldier from the front lines to his home in just a few minutes? For many, such a device was a simple musical instrument that fit in their pocket. Most often, it was a harmonica, an unpretentious, loud, and very soulful instrument. In the brief moments of calm when the shooting subsided, the sounds of a simple, familiar melody would suddenly be heard in the trenches or dugouts. It was one of the soldiers taking out his harmonica, and at that moment, a miracle happened. The war receded into the background. Music was a bridge from the mud of the trenches to peaceful life. Simple tunes reminded them of home, evenings with friends, dancing with their beloved girlfriends. These memories warmed their souls and gave them strength. Playing the harmonica did not require any special talent or knowledge of musical notation. Many soldiers learned to play right on the front lines, picking up popular songs by ear. The instrument was easy to maintain and could withstand the conditions of military life. Music brought people together. Comrades would gather around the improvised musician, and soon several people would be quietly singing along, while others tapped out the rhythm on the lid of their mess kits. These were precious moments of brotherhood and unity. Sometimes music became a weapon. There are known cases when, during a lull, Soviet soldiers played Katyusha on the harmonica, and the Germans responded on their harmonicas. It was a kind of dialogue without words, reminding everyone that on both sides of the front line there were ordinary people longing for home. In addition to harmonicas, other instruments could be found in pockets. For example, a small flute or a homemade whistle. Any object capable of producing a melodious sound was worth its weight in gold. For many soldiers, a musical instrument was as important a piece of equipment as a shovel or a flask. They protected it from moisture and dirt, understanding that it saved not the body, but the soul. It helped to express the longing, fear, and pain that could not be put into words. These trench concerts were a form of psychological relief. They helped to release the tremendous tension and forget the horrors of war, at least for a while. Melody healed emotional wounds better than any medicine. What melody do you think could support you in the most difficult moment? In the next chapter, we will talk about how ordinary household items were turned into ingenious life hacks that saved lives. A soldier's pocket contained many small but extremely useful items. It was a real survival kit, where each item had a double or even triple purpose. Soldiers' ingenuity turned the most ordinary items into indispensable tools. One such item was an ordinary pocket knife. It was not only used to cut bread and open cans, it was also used to repair ammunition, cut tent pegs, and, in extreme cases, it could be used as a weapon in hand-to-hand combat. A sewing kit, consisting of several needles and a spool of thread, was a must-have. It could be used to quickly repair a torn shirt or sew in a detached button. A neat and tidy appearance was not only a requirement of the regulations, but also a matter of self-respect. The thread from such a kit had another use. It was used as fishing line for an improvised fishing rod to diversify the meager diet, and in field medicine, a strong thread, disinfected with alcohol, could be used for sutures. A small pocket mirror was also a multifunctional item. It was not only used for shaving. With its help, it was possible to send light signals or discreetly survey the area from around a corner or from a trench without exposing oneself to bullets. A bar of soap was highly valued. Maintaining hygiene in trench conditions was the best prevention against diseases that killed soldiers, no less than enemy bullets. In addition, dry soap could be used to lubricate the rifle bolt for smoother operation. A pencil and notebook, or just a scrap of paper, were important not only for writing letters. They could be used to sketch enemy fortifications, record important information, or simply keep a personal diary. Today, these records are invaluable historical documents. Ordinary buttons also became an object of soldiers' ingenuity. They were sewn onto the inside of the collar so that it would get less dirty and could be easily cleaned. American soldiers received special kits with spare buttons, which were valued as an important part of their equipment. All these items were simple and uncomplicated, but it was precisely these little things that made up a soldier's life. The ability to use what was at hand correctly often meant the difference between life and death. This set of practical items was universal for soldiers of all armies, German, American, or Russian. Each of them knew the value of a simple knife, a needle and thread, and a bar of soap. War erased differences, leaving only one common goal for all: to survive. Are you ready to learn about the most powerful weapon that did not shoot but struck straight to the heart? This weapon was a simple paper triangle, a soldier's letter. For a soldier, it was a breath of peaceful life, proof that he was loved and awaited. Receiving letters was one of the most joyful and long-awaited events at the front. When the postman brought the coveted bag, work stopped, and everyone waited impatiently for their name to be called. A letter from home was more important than a hot meal. These letters were read and reread dozens of times until they were worn out and the letters began to blur. Every soldier knew his letter by heart, but still took it out again and again to touch his native handwriting once more. These lines contained his entire past, peaceful life. The letters were kept in a breast pocket, along with photographs and documents. They smelled like home, and this scent, barely perceptible, was more precious than the most exquisite perfume. It reminded them of the warmth and comfort that was so lacking in the cold dugouts. Writing a reply was no less important a ritual. Soldiers wrote on whatever they could find: scraps of paper, newspaper margins, captured letterheads. A chemical pencil was a real treasure because what was written with it was not so susceptible to moisture. In their letters, the soldiers tried not to talk about the horrors of war so as not to upset their loved ones. They wrote about simple things: friends, the weather, soldiers, porridge, and every letter had the same main phrase: "I'm fine, I'll be back soon with victory." These letters were needed not only by those waiting in the rear, but also by the soldiers themselves. By putting his thoughts on paper, a soldier put his inner world in order. It was a kind of confession that helped him cope with what he had experienced. Censors strictly monitored the content of the letters, crossing out any mention of the location of the unit, the names of commanders, or details of battles. But they could not cross out the main thing: the love, tenderness, and hope that permeated these lines. Do you think modern electronic messages are capable of conveying the warmth that a simple paper triangle held? In the next chapter, we will look into the most hidden corners of soldiers' pockets and learn about the things that help them preserve their humanity. There was always room in a soldier's pocket for a small, sacred reserve. Most often it was something sweet: a few sugar cubes, a bar of chocolate, or a couple of candies. This small reserve was not just food, but medicine for the soul and a symbol of peaceful life. Sugar was real currency on the front lines. It could be exchanged for tobacco, writing paper, or other necessary items. A mug of hot tea with sugar after a hard battle was a real treat that restored strength and cheerfulness. Soldiers kept sugar wrapped in a cloth so that it would not get wet or crumble. They always kept a few pieces with them in case of injury. It was believed that sweets helped to ease pain and shock. Chocolate was part of the diet of pilots and paratroopers, but for ordinary infantrymen it was a rare delicacy. A bar received in a parcel from home was not eaten immediately. It was divided into small pieces, and the pleasure was stretched out over several days. The taste of chocolate instantly transported soldiers back to their childhood, to a world where there was no war. The contrast between the sweet taste and the bitter reality was very strong. It reminded them of the world they were fighting for. Lollipops, or montpensier in a tin box, were another way to sweeten their harsh daily life. They sucked on them during long marches or while on guard duty. It helped them distract themselves, chase away sleep, and brighten up the tedious hours of waiting. Sometimes sweets were used as a reward. A commander could reward a distinguished soldier with a piece of sugar or a biscuit with condensed milk. At the front, such a reward was valued no less than official gratitude. This sweet stash was the soldier's personal property, his little secret. It was eaten at special moments, after a successful attack, in honor of a birthday, or simply when things became unbearable. It was a way to give oneself a small gift. Taking care of such a stash was a sign of a soldier's foresight. The ability to save and stretch out a small piece of joy for a long time was an important survival skill. It taught them to appreciate the simple things that seem mundane in peacetime. Despite the harsh conditions, many soldiers had room in their pockets and duffel bags for a small book. It could be a volume of poems by a favorite poet, a worn detective novel, or simply a collection of short stories. Reading was a way to escape the horrors of war for at least a few hours. Books were extremely rare and valuable at the front. They were passed from hand to hand and read until they were worn out. Dozens of people could read the same book, then share their impressions during short breaks. The most popular works were those that affirmed faith in humanity, justice, and love. The poems of Simonov and Tvardovsky, the stories of Jack London, and the novels of Jules Verne transported readers to another world full of adventure, nobility, and hope. Reading in the trenches was no easy task. You had to seize brief moments of silence, reading by the light of a smoky lamp or a dim bulb. But immersing yourself in a fictional world was worth the effort. Books were not just entertainment, but intellectual and spiritual nourishment. They kept the soul from becoming hardened, forcing one to think and empathize. They reminded one that the world was much bigger and more complex than the bloody carnage of the front lines. Books sent from home were especially prized. Inscriptions on the flyleaf written by a loved one, bookmarks made of dried flowers. All this made the book not just a collection of texts, but a living greeting from peaceful life. It became as much of a talisman as a photograph. Soldiers often copied their favorite poems by hand into their notebooks. They then memorized these poems and read them to each other. Poetry took on a special power and depth in the conditions of war. Even a single page torn from a book could become a treasure. It was read and reread until the text was worn away from touch. In it, they sought answers to the eternal questions that were posed with particular acuity. Books were silent companions who would never betray them and would always find the right words of comfort. They helped preserve sanity and human dignity in inhuman conditions. They were a beacon of culture in the darkness of barbarism. In the mud, dampness, and unsanitary conditions of the trenches, the simplest hygiene items became vital. The struggle for cleanliness was no less important than the struggle against the enemy. The health and combat effectiveness of entire units depended on it. Every soldier had a shaving kit in his pocket. It consisted of a safety razor, a blade, and a small brush. A clean-shaven face was not a whim, but a requirement of the regulations and a necessity. Stubble prevented the gas mask from fitting snugly. Shaving in the field was a real ritual. Water was heated on a fire in a kettle, and a soapy cloth was used instead of shaving foam. This daily ritual helped soldiers maintain discipline and keep their spirits up. Toothbrushes and tooth powder were highly valued. They were harder to obtain than razors. Therefore, soldiers resorted to folk remedies. They cleaned their teeth with salt, charcoal from the fire, or simply with their fingers. A small towel, which was usually worn wrapped around the neck, was an indispensable item. It was used to wipe the face after washing and sweat during forced marches. A clean towel was a sign of a soldier's neatness. A handkerchief was also a must-have. It was used for its intended purpose, as well as a water filter or bandage for minor scratches. Keeping your handkerchief clean was a matter of honor. All these items helped soldiers maintain their human appearance. In conditions that pushed people to an animal state, simple hygiene was an act of self-respect. It was a way of saying to oneself, "I will not give up, I will remain human." Commanders strictly monitored compliance with hygiene standards. They understood that a neat and tidy soldier was a disciplined and reliable fighter. Sloppiness in appearance was often the first sign of a decline in morale. These simple items, a razor, a toothbrush, soap, were tools in the battle for self-respect. This battle was no less important than the battles on the front lines. It was in this battle that true soldierly fortitude was forged. Sometimes the most eloquent contents of pockets were their absence. Empty pockets told their own special story, a story of loss, of the swiftness of battle, or of the fact that soldiers carried everything of value not in their pockets, but in their souls and memories. During a sudden attack or retreat, there was no time for belongings. The main task was to save one's life and weapons. All personal items that seemed so important yesterday instantly lost their value. Soldiers who broke out of encirclement or survived the terrible meat grinder often had nothing with them but torn clothes and a rifle. Their pockets were empty, but their experience was priceless. They knew the true value of life. Empty pockets could also be a sign of a soldier's philosophy. Some fighters deliberately did not attach themselves to material things. They believed that any property in war was an unnecessary burden that held them back and prevented them from fighting. For them, the main value was military brotherhood, a sense of camaraderie. They kept memories of home and loved ones in their hearts without needing material reminders. Their memories were their greatest treasure. Sometimes soldiers would give their most valuable possessions to their comrades before a dangerous mission or battle. They would ask that, in the event of their death, a photograph or letter be sent to their families. This simple gesture showed enormous trust and acceptance of their fate. Things were lost, became unusable, or burned along with their owners. War constantly took away everything that was dear to a person. The ability to come to terms with these losses and continue to fight was a sign of tremendous inner strength. Thus, the contents of a soldier's pockets were a kind of mirror of his soul, his experience, and his attitude toward the war. Some pockets were filled with useful trinkets and cherished relics. Others were empty because the most important things did not need to be carried in pockets. This story about what soldiers carried is not just a list of items. It is a story about the human soul, which even in the most inhuman conditions seeks support in love, memory, faith, and creativity. These small things were anchors that kept them from drowning in the ocean of war. We looked into the most hidden corners of soldiers' souls, their pockets, and we saw that behind the harsh military uniform lay whole worlds full of love, hope, and incredible ingenuity. Photographs, letters, homemade amulets, and simple everyday items. All of these were not just things, but real weapons in the fight for the right to remain human. These items tell us about the war in a way that history textbooks cannot. They speak of quiet, everyday heroism, of strength of spirit, and of how simple human feelings help people survive the most terrible trials. This is a story about how even in the deepest darkness, there is always room for light. Which of these soldiers' finds did you find most touching or ingenious? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new investigations into the mysteries of the past.